Alright, so in this video, I'm bringing in my sketches to Illustrator to trace them as vector images. I initially set the sizing wrong on my artboard, so later in the video, I'll go over how to fix it and do it correctly. Just placing that scanned image here. I've got all of my characters on one sheet. I'm going to focus here on the one that is myself. And to help me out in that process, I'm bringing in some older artwork that I made in week 1 and using that as sort of a reference. Obviously, this is different in that it's not facing towards the viewer. The character's facing away, but I can still kind of use some of the torso and the head shapes and just, cut out a little bit of work for myself. At this point in the process, I'm not really paying super close attention to all the scaling and the relative scales of each of my characters. This is still just concept art, so this is still just sort of showing the fictional world, showing the feel of the game. Even though I'm trying to get this as developed as I can, there's always going to be some parts that I know still need some work. So one example of that is making 2 separate shapes for the legs. And the reason for that being there are probably some places down the road where I might want to make different poses of this character, some animations of this character where the legs do a little bit of motion. And setting it up this way is going to make it a little bit easier once I get to that point. So I ended up here just splitting a silhouette shape into 2 using the Pathfinder. You could also use the scissor tool or the knife tool to do the same thing. So you can see I got 2 separate shapes there. A little bit of cleanup on the anchor points, and then I'll add an additional ellipse to sort of be the butt shape. And based on the way that I'll fill those shapes and stack them in the layers, I'll get a nice overlap and still maintain the ability to move the legs around if I need to. I'm really noticing as I'm tracing all these sort of how much less forgiving vector art is versus hand drawing. I think with hand drawing, especially with the sort of shaky line that I tend to use, you can get away with a lot more sort of off proportions or just weird things that don't really make sense anatomically. With vector art, I think because it's maybe a little bit cleaner, it's just not as forgiving. So I'm spending a little more time here kind of cleaning things up, fixing some mistakes that I made in my initial drawings. And that's one of the reasons I like vector art so much, is that it's really, really malleable, really easy to change things and tweak things, like I'm doing here with the sleeve on the shirt. So just experimenting with some different path styles, getting my layering correct, and messing with some color palette stuff. Again, none of this has to be set in stone at this point. The main focus of this assignment is to do some development of the artwork, development of the ideas around the fictional world. So it shouldn't be finished yet, but it should be beyond, sort of the very first stages. And that'll give you opportunities to catch things that are a little bit off. That'll give you opportunities to have some sort of, surprise encounters with your own artwork, which is really important anytime you're doing any sort of art, but especially when you're doing something that's as rich and interactive as a game. It's really important to really have things thought through, spend time developing your artwork, think about how things are going to operate, and get it to where it's, being expressive of the things that you're interested in. And you'll see I'm ending up spending a lot of time tweaking that hand. I am not that good at drawing hands, and that's probably the hardest thing to draw, that and faces. But one of the challenges here is I'm trying to keep a real consistent graphical style. So the portrait that I've drawn so far, it's pretty stylized, pretty geometric, but I still want to get a relatively realistic hand, at least to the point that it, resembles a hand and it reads as a hand, but still also fits in with the rest of my graphical style. So I got to kind of strike that balance of sort of chunky, slightly exaggerated, but still maintaining some of the important anatomical features. So I'm just kind of goofing around here with approaches at foreshortening those features and getting it to line up, with the rest of the image as it stands. Another thing that I sort of learned from going through this process and spending some time with this artwork is that I'm probably going to want to adjust the pose of the character. So right now, the head's facing directly away from the point of view of the viewer, but the body's a little bit tilted sideways. So I want to get that more consistent, either have one pose that's completely facing away and then one that's a little bit rotated. And I probably would not have come to that conclusion, that knowledge, if I didn't spend time, developing this. So if I had just done that first sketch and run with it, I might have made the mistake of having things look a little bit off. So working on your artwork like this gives you more chances to catch your own mistakes. All right, so I'm pretty much done here. Ready to export. I'm hitting File, Export as JPEG from the menu bar. Now I realize that this came out way too small, so I'm going to jump back into Illustrator here. So going up to File, we'll go into Document Setup, edit my artboards, and I was not paying attention to the restriction that my images need to be 1200 pixels in their largest dimension. So I'll just do a little rescaling here. Go ahead again, hit File, Export to JPEG. Some important info here. I'm setting my resolution to 150, and I'm setting my art sampling to super sampling, not the type optimized sampling.